Welcome to Monk's Temple. You arrived here carrying something. We all do. It is the weight we have been holding so long we forgot it was ever placed on our shoulders. It is the question we stopped asking because we assumed it had no answer. It is the quiet ache that follows us from room to room, from relationship to relationship, from year to year. You call it stress. You call it dissatisfaction. You call it the vague sense that you are supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. You have spent your life trying to outrun this feeling. You changed jobs. You changed partners. You changed cities. You changed your hair, your beliefs, your entire identity. And still, here it is. Sitting beside you. Breathing with you. What if it is not here because you failed to escape it? What if it is here because you have been looking for the exit in the wrong direction? The Buddha was a prince. He had palaces, gardens, servants, and every conceivable pleasure arranged around him like flowers in a carefully curated vase. And yet, when he looked honestly at his own experience, he found the same quiet ache you have been carrying. So he left. Not because he was ungrateful. Not because he was depressed. He left because he refused to spend his life decorating the walls of a prison he had not yet examined. What he discovered under the bodhi tree was not a secret doctrine reserved for the elite. It was not a magical incantation that would transport him to a painless dimension. He discovered that the prison was never locked. Let us begin with thirst. Imagine you are scrolling through your phone late at night. You have checked every app. You have responded to every message. There is nothing new to see. And yet your thumb continues to move upward, pulling fresh content into view. You are not looking for anything specific. You are simply enacting a ritual that has become as automatic as breathing. What are you actually seeking? You are seeking relief from the discomfort of being alone with your own mind. You are seeking the tiny hit of dopamine that arrives with novelty. You are seeking the illusion that something, anything, is about to change. This is thirst. The ancient Pali word is tanha. It is the forward leaning of the mind toward a future moment that promises to be better than this one. It is the fundamental belief that your well-being is located somewhere other than where you currently are. Tanha is not the desire for specific objects. It is the energy of desire itself, unmoored from any particular target. This morning it wanted coffee. Now it wants recognition. Tonight it will want rest. The objects change. The thirst remains. Modern psychology confirms what the Buddha observed 26 centuries ago. The dopamine system does not reward satisfaction. It rewards anticipation. The moment you finally get what you wanted, dopamine levels drop. The pleasure evaporates. And the mind immediately begins scanning for the next thing to want. You are not broken because you experience this. You are not spiritually immature because your mind wanders toward future pleasures. You are simply human. But you have been trained to misinterpret this experience. You have been trained to believe that the thirst is evidence of lack. I want, therefore I am incomplete. I am incomplete, therefore I must acquire. I acquire, therefore I will be complete. It is a lie. But it is a lie that generates trillions of dollars in economic activity, so the culture has no incentive to correct you. A man lived in a region that received abundant rainfall. Every evening, the clouds would gather over the mountains and release their water upon the valley. The rivers swelled. The reservoirs filled. The crops drank deeply. But this man did not trust the rain. He believed that the clouds would one day stop their generosity. He believed that the rivers would run dry and the reservoirs would crack under the summer sun. So he began to collect water. He placed buckets in his courtyard. He installed barrels beneath his gutters. He dug cisterns beneath his floorboards. Every drop of rain that fell upon his property was captured, contained, and guarded. His neighbors thought him wise. They admired his foresight. They came to him during the dry months and begged for water, and he sold it to them at great profit. But as the years passed, the man grew exhausted. He spent his days monitoring his containers. He repaired leaks. He chased away thieves. He calculated and recalculated his reserves. He could not sleep, because every hour of sleep was an hour he was not protecting his wealth. One night, a storm arrived with unusual ferocity. The wind tore through the valley. The rain fell in sheets. And the man, standing at his window, watched in horror as his buckets tipped, his barrels burst, his cisterns flooded his own basement. He ran outside into the storm. He tried to save what he could. But the water was everywhere and nowhere, escaping through his fingers, returning to the earth from which it came. He collapsed in the mud. And then, because there was nothing else to do, he looked up at the sky. The rain was still falling. It was falling on his broken containers. It was falling on his flooded courtyard. It was falling on the mountains and the valleys and the distant sea. It was falling on him. He opened his mouth. He drank. And he understood, for the first time in his life, that he had never needed to collect the rain. He had only needed to stand in it. This is the invitation of the Buddha. Not to collect more. Not to guard your resources more diligently. Not to calculate and strategize and secure your future. The invitation is to stand in the rain. The thirst you feel is not evidence of lack. It is evidence that you have been trying to contain what was meant to flow through you. You have been building cisterns in a country where water falls freely from the sky. You have been hoarding peace in a universe that is nothing but the constant, generous giving of itself. You do not need to earn the rain. You do not need to deserve it. You do not need to prove yourself worthy of it. You only need to stop running from shelter to shelter and step out into the open. The water is falling right now. Can you feel it on your face? We have spoken of thirst. We have spoken of the endless reaching, the forward leaning of the mind toward a future that never quite arrives. But there is something we have not yet examined. Something we have been circling like a bird circling a field, unwilling to land. Why do we thirst? It is not enough to say that thirst is the engine of dissatisfaction. A physician who merely names the fever has not treated the patient. The fever is a symptom. The question is, what infection causes the body to burn? The Buddha looked deeply into the nature of thirst. He did not look away when the examination became uncomfortable. He did not content himself with surface explanations. He followed the chain of causation all the way to its origin. And what he found there, at the very bottom of human experience, was not a thing. It was a mistake. We thirst because we believe we are separate. This is not a philosophical position. It is not a metaphysical claim about the nature of reality. It is a direct observation of the structure of conscious experience. Look at your own mind right now. Notice how it constructs a sense of self. There is the awareness that is reading these words, hearing this voice, considering these ideas. And then there is everything else. The words. The voice. The ideas. The room. The world. The mind draws a circle. Inside the circle, me. Outside the circle, everything else. And then the mind spends the rest of its life trying to manage the relationship between what is inside the circle and what is outside. This is the original error. Not the existence of the self. The self is a useful convention, a convenient designation, a way of organizing experience. The error is believing that the circle is real. The error is forgetting that you are the one who drew it. Imagine you are standing in an empty field at night. You take a flashlight and you shine it on a single tree. The tree is illuminated. Everything else remains in darkness. In that moment, it is easy to believe that the tree is the only thing that exists. It is easy to forget that the darkness is full of other trees, other fields, other worlds. It is easy to mistake the narrow beam of your attention for the totality of what is. This is what it feels like to be a self. The flashlight of consciousness illuminates a small collection of sensations, memories, and thoughts, and we call this collection me. Everything else recedes into darkness. And because we cannot see beyond the beam, we believe the darkness is empty. But the darkness is not empty. The darkness is full. It is full of other beings, other consciousnesses, other worlds of experience as rich and complex as your own. It is full of the sky and the earth and the oceans and the stars. It is full of the entire universe, which continues to exist whether your flashlight happens to be pointing at it or not. The thirst for objects, experiences, and identities is actually a thirst for wholeness. You feel the circle around yourself as a confinement, a separation, an isolation. You sense that something is missing. And because you have forgotten that you are the one who drew the circle, you believe that what is missing must be located outside it. So you reach. You grasp. You acquire. You consume. You bring things inside the circle, hoping they will fill the emptiness. And for a moment, they do. A new possession. A new relationship. A new achievement. The circle expands to include it, and you feel a temporary relief from the claustrophobia of selfhood. But the relief never lasts. The circle, no matter how large you draw it, is still a circle. It still excludes infinitely more than it includes. And the moment the novelty fades, you become aware again of the vast darkness pressing against the boundaries of your small illuminated territory. There was once a cartographer who was commissioned to map a great kingdom. He traveled to every corner of the realm. He climbed every mountain. He crossed every river. He walked every road. He recorded every village, every forest, every field. After 7 years, his map was complete. He rolled up the enormous parchment and presented it to the king. The king was delighted. He hung the map on the wall of his throne room and consulted it before every decision. But the cartographer was not satisfied. He kept looking at the map and feeling that something was wrong. He spent another year traveling, comparing the map to the actual territory, searching for the error he knew must exist. Finally, he understood. The map was perfect. Every mountain, every river, every road was exactly where it should be. The error was not in the map. The error was in the cartographer himself. He had drawn the kingdom as if he were standing outside it. He had drawn mountains and rivers and roads as if they existed separate from the eyes that beheld them. He had forgotten to draw himself. He returned to the throne room and unrolled the map one final time. He took his brush and dipped it in ink. And in the exact center of the parchment, over the place where the capital city stood, over the place where the throne room stood, over the place where he himself was standing at that very moment, he drew a single small dot. The king looked at the dot and frowned. "What is that?" "Your Majesty," said the cartographer, "that is where the map is being seen. This is what the Buddha discovered under the bodhi tree. Not that the self does not exist. The self exists in the same way the cartographer's dot exists. It is a convention, a designation, a useful marker. The error is believing that the dot is the territory. The error is forgetting that the dot was drawn by the same hand that drew the mountains and the rivers and the roads. You are not inside the universe looking out. You are the universe looking at itself from a particular location, through a particular set of eyes, in a particular moment of time. The circle you have drawn around yourself is not a prison. It is a perspective. And perspectives, no matter how convincing, are not solid. They shift. They change. They dissolve and reform with every new glance. The thirst for objects and experiences is actually a thirst to remember what you have forgotten. You have forgotten that the darkness outside the circle is not empty. You have forgotten that the flashlight in your hand is not the source of light but a momentary focus of an infinite radiance. You have forgotten that you are not the dot on the map. You are the one holding the brush. And the brush is still in your hand. It has always been in your hand. You have simply been so busy examining the map that you forgot to look at your own fingers. We have spoken of thirst. We have spoken of the mistaken belief that you are separate from the world you observe. These are not merely philosophical insights. They are descriptions of a disease that has been operating in your consciousness since before you learned to speak. Every disease has a trajectory. It begins as a possibility, a seed planted in fertile ground. It grows, branching into the body's systems, claiming territory, normalizing its presence. And then, if left untreated, it progresses toward its final stage. The Buddha observed this trajectory in the human mind. He saw how the seed of ignorance, planted in the soil of separation, grows into the tangled vine of craving. He saw how that vine wraps itself around the heart and constricts until the heart forgets it was ever capable of beating freely. But here is the radical claim that separates the Buddha from every pessimist and nihilist who ever gazed upon human suffering: the disease can be cured. Not managed. Not palliated. Not temporarily relieved. Cured. Completely. Irreversibly. This is the third noble truth. It is not a promise. It is not a hope. It is a report from someone who successfully underwent the treatment and recovered his original health. The Buddha called this cure nibbana. The word means to extinguish, to blow out, to cool. It is what happens to a flame when it exhausts its fuel. The flame does not go somewhere else. It does not enter a different state of existence. It does not retreat to a celestial realm where flames burn eternally without consuming. The flame simply ceases. What remains is not absence. What remains is the condition that was always present beneath the burning. We struggle to understand nibbana because we try to grasp it as an object. We ask, what is it? Where is it? How do I get there? But these questions are invalid. They assume that nibbana is a thing that can be possessed, a destination that can be reached, a state that can be achieved. Nibbana is not any of these. Nibbana is what remains when the possessing, the reaching, and the achieving finally stop. Imagine a room filled with smoke. The smoke is so thick you cannot see the walls, the ceiling, the floor. You cannot see your own hand in front of your face. You have lived in this room so long you have forgotten that a room exists beneath the smoke. You believe the smoke is your world. Then someone opens a window. The smoke begins to clear. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the walls emerge from the haze. The ceiling appears. The floor solidifies beneath your feet. You can see again. What did the open window add to the room? Nothing. The walls were always there. The ceiling was always there. The floor was always there. The window did not create the room. It simply revealed what had been concealed. This is nibbana. It is not the acquisition of something new. It is the dissipation of something old. It is the smoke clearing, the flame cooling, the fever breaking. It is not that you finally find what you were seeking. It is that you finally stop seeking and recognize that what you were looking for was never lost. There was once a musician who owned a beautiful lute. It was carved from the wood of a 100-year-old tree and strung with silk thread imported from distant kingdoms. Its sound was so pure that audiences wept when he played. One evening, after a concert, the musician set his lute down and went to sleep. During the night, a thief entered his home and stole the instrument. The musician woke to find the lute gone. He searched everywhere. He offered rewards. He traveled to neighboring cities, asking everyone he met if they had seen his beloved instrument. Years passed. His hair grayed. His fingers, once so agile on the strings, grew stiff with age and disuse. One day, an old woman approached him on the street. "I hear you are looking for a lute," she said. "Yes," said the musician. "Have you seen it?" "I have a lute," she said. "It was left to me by my son, who passed away last winter. I do not know its worth. I only know it is too beautiful to gather dust in my attic. Would you like to see it?" She led him to her home. She climbed the ladder to the attic and returned carrying an instrument covered in dust. The musician took it in his hands. He recognized the carving on the neck. He recognized the weight of it, the balance of it, the way it settled into his arms like a sleeping child. He began to weep. Not tears of joy. Not tears of relief. He wept because he realized that for 20 years he had been searching for a lute, but the music had never left him. The music was in his fingers. The music was in his breath. The music was in the silence between his heartbeats. The lute was only a container. And containers, no matter how beautiful, are not the contents. This is nibbana. It is the recognition that what you have been seeking has never been absent from you. You have been searching for peace as if it were a lost object, hidden in some distant corner of the universe, requiring heroic effort to recover. But peace is not an object. Peace is the absence of searching. Peace is what remains when you finally put down the map and admit that you were never lost. You were never lost. You were never separate. You were never incomplete. The smoke obscured your vision, but the smoke was never part of the room. It was only a temporary condition, a passing disturbance, a weather pattern in the vast and unperturbed sky of your awareness. The window is open. The smoke is clearing. You do not need to become worthy of fresh air. You do not need to earn the right to breathe. You only need to inhale. We have diagnosed the disease. We have identified its origin. We have confirmed that a cure exists. Now we arrive at the question every patient asks the physician, "What do I do?" The Buddha did not leave his followers in suspense. He spent 45 years walking the dusty roads of northern India, describing the architecture of a well-lived life. He called this architecture the Noble Eightfold Path. But we must be careful. The word path suggests a journey from one place to another. It suggests a starting point and a destination. These are useful conventions, but they are also traps. The path is not a sequence of steps you complete and discard. The path is a way of living that embodies the destination within each moment. You do not walk the path to reach Nibbana. You walk the path, and the walking itself is Nibbana expressing itself through your body, speech, and mind. The path has 8 strands, but they are not 8 steps on a ladder. They are 8 strands of a single rope, each supporting the others. Pull one strand and the entire rope tightens. Sever one strand and the rope frays. Right view is the willingness to see clearly. It is not the adoption of correct opinions. It is the courage to look at your experience without the distortion of wanting things to be different than they are. Right view recognizes that actions have consequences. When you act from grasping, you suffer. When you act from generosity, you experience ease. Right view recognizes that everything you hold will eventually be released. Right view recognizes that the circle you have drawn around yourself was drawn by your own hand. Right intention is the natural orientation of a mind that sees clearly. When you no longer believe your well-being is located outside yourself, the frantic reaching subsides. You stop trying to become someone else and begin the work of being fully who you are. Right intention is renunciation of the constant project of self-improvement. It is goodwill, not as a strategy for getting what you want, but as the natural warmth of a hand that has stopped clenching into a fist. Right speech is the recognition that words are actions. They do not merely describe reality, they participate in creating it. Right speech means abstaining from falsehood, because lying fractures your relationship with what is true. Right speech means abstaining from divisive words that build walls where bridges could exist. Right speech means abstaining from harshness, from using your voice as a weapon. Right speech means abstaining from idle chatter, from filling silence with noise simply because silence makes you uncomfortable. Right action is the ethical floor of the path. It is the minimum standard of conduct required for the mind to settle into stillness. Right action means not taking what is not given, not exploiting vulnerability for your own gain. Right action means honoring the body by refraining from harm. Right action means honoring commitments, keeping promises, being reliable. This is not a list of rules imposed by external authority. It is how a human being naturally behaves when no longer enslaved by craving. Right livelihood is the recognition that how you earn your living is not separate from how you live your life. You cannot spend 40 hours a week causing harm and then meditate for 1 hour to purify your mind. Right livelihood means avoiding professions that depend on exploitation, deception, or the manufacture of suffering. But it is also positive. Your work can be an expression of awakening. You do not need to become a monk. You can practice in an office, a classroom, a hospital, a workshop. Right effort is the energy of the path. It is not the gritted teeth effort of forcing yourself to be someone you are not. It is the effort of a gardener, patient, persistent, gentle. Right effort has 4 dimensions: preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning unwholesome states that have already arisen, cultivating wholesome states that have not yet arisen, and maintaining wholesome states that have already arisen. Right mindfulness is presence. It is the ability to be fully here, in this body, in this breath, without trying to escape into the past or future. Mindfulness is non-forgetting. Remembering, moment after moment, that you are not your thoughts but the awareness in which thoughts appear. Mindfulness is protection, creating space between stimulus and response, and discovering freedom in that space. Right concentration is the collectedness of mind. It is the opposite of the scattered, fragmented attention that characterizes modern life. Right concentration is the ability to sustain attention on a single object without being pulled away by distraction. A concentrated mind is like a laser, focused, powerful, precise. With such a mind, you can cut through the deepest knots of delusion. A potter had a son who watched him at the wheel every day. The boy loved how the wet clay rose between his father's palms, how pressure became form, how spin became stillness. When he was old enough, his father taught him to throw. The boy had talent. His bowls were round. His cups were balanced. His vases seemed to hold not just water but light. But the boy was not satisfied. He wanted to make the perfect pot, the one that would never crack, never chip, never need to be replaced. He searched for finer clay, hotter kilns, smoother glazes. He worked from dawn until his fingers bled. One evening, exhausted and defeated, he fell asleep at the wheel. In his dream, he saw a pot of such perfect proportion that it seemed to have been spun by the gods themselves. He reached for it, and his hand passed through the clay as if through smoke. He woke to find his father sitting beside him. "Father," he said, "I dreamed of the perfect pot. But when I touched it, it was not there." His father said nothing. He took a lump of clay and threw it on the wheel. His hands found their familiar position. The wheel began to turn. "The perfect pot," his father said, "is not a pot. It is the space that pots reveal. You have been trying to capture the sky in a jar. But the sky cannot be contained. It can only be honored." The son watched his father's hands. He watched the clay rise and thin and open. He watched the pot emerge from the spin. And he understood, for the first time, that he had never needed to make the perfect pot. He only needed to spend his life at the wheel. This is the path. Not the pursuit of perfection. Not the achievement of a flawless final state. It is the willingness to inhabit your life completely, without holding back and without grasping at results. It is the clay rising between your palms. It is the wheel turning. It is the pot emerging, holding its small portion of air, and one day returning to dust. You do not need to become a master potter. You only need to sit at the wheel. We have walked through the architecture of the path. We have examined its 8 strands and seen how they weave together into a single rope. But architecture is not an habitation. A map is not a journey. Knowing the path exists is not the same as placing your foot upon it. The question now is not what the path is. The question is how to walk it while living in a world that seems designed to pull you off course. You have emails to answer, children to feed, deadlines to meet, relationships to maintain. You cannot retreat to a forest cave and meditate for 20 years. You have to find your way while standing in the middle of traffic. The Buddha understood this. He was not speaking exclusively to monks and nuns who had renounced the world. He was speaking to householders, merchants, farmers, parents. He was speaking to people who had to earn a living, raise children, navigate the complexities of human relationship. The path was never meant to be an escape from ordinary life. It was meant to be a way of living ordinary life with extraordinary awareness. So how do you practice the path when your alarm clock is screaming at you before sunrise? How do you practice when your child is having a tantrum in the grocery store? How do you practice when your boss is criticizing your work and your colleagues are watching to see how you will react? You begin with the breath. Not because the breath is sacred. Not because the breath is special. You begin with the breath because it is always with you. It is the one constant in the shifting landscape of your experience. Every inhalation is a birth. Every exhalation is a death. And between them, there is a pause, a silence, a door. You do not need to sit on a cushion to find this door. You can find it while waiting for your coffee to brew. You can find it while stopped at a red light. You can find it in the moment between receiving a difficult message and composing your reply. That pause, however brief, is the entire path compressed into a single breath. In that pause, right view becomes possible. You see that you are not your anger. You are the one witnessing the anger. You see that the person who provoked you is also suffering, also thirsty, also circling the same well. You see that this moment, exactly as it is, contains everything you need to practice. In that pause, right intention arises naturally. You do not need to manufacture goodwill, you only need to stop feeding hostility. You do not need to become compassionate. You only need to recognize that the boundary between self and other was never as solid as you believed. In that pause, right speech waits for your decision. You can pour fuel on the fire, or you can let the fire burn itself out. The words are not yet spoken. The silence is still intact. This is your moment of freedom. A ferryman worked on a wide river, transporting passengers from one bank to the other. His boat was small and his arms were strong. Day after day, he pulled the oars through the water, carrying merchants and monks, farmers and soldiers, lovers and mourners. One evening, as he was preparing to dock for the night, a young man approached him. "Ferryman," he said, "I have been traveling for 3 years, seeking a teacher who can show me the way to liberation. I have studied with gurus in the mountains and ascetics in the forests. I have memorized scriptures and mastered complex meditations. But I am still not free. Can you help me?" The ferryman looked at the young man's earnest face. He looked at his own calloused hands. He looked at the river, dark and silent beneath the fading light. "Get in the boat," the ferryman said. The young man obeyed. The ferryman pushed off from the bank and began to row. The boat glided across the dark water. Neither man spoke. When they reached the opposite shore, the ferryman said, "Get out." The young man stepped onto the bank. He turned back, confused. "But you haven't taught me anything." The ferryman pointed to the boat. When we were in the middle of the river, did you wish you were on one shore or the other? Of course not, said the young man. We were in the boat. The shores were not where I was. And did you try to carry the boat on your shoulders while we crossed? No. The boat was beneath me. I simply sat in it. The ferryman nodded. For 3 years you have been running from shore to shore, collecting maps and consulting guides. But you never got in the boat. You never sat in the middle of the river and let the crossing itself be your teacher. He pulled his oars into the boat and turned toward the water. Liberation is not on either shore, he said. Liberation is the boat. Liberation is the oars in your hands. Liberation is the river accepting the weight of your vessel and carrying you, moment by moment, to exactly where you need to be. The young man stood on the bank and watched the ferryman disappear into the darkness. He did not follow. He did not ask another question. He simply stood there, feeling the river move beneath his feet, feeling the boat of his own breath rise and fall. He had arrived. This is the practice. Not the pursuit of distant shores. Not the accumulation of spiritual experiences. Not the achievement of advanced meditative states. It is the willingness to get in the boat every morning and row. It is the willingness to be exactly where you are, doing exactly what you are doing, without demanding that this moment be different than it is. Your breath is your boat. Your body is your oar. The present moment is the river that accepts your weight and carries you forward. You do not need to find the perfect teacher. You do not need to retreat to a cave. You do not need to wait until your life becomes quieter, simpler, less demanding. The path is available right now, in the middle of traffic, in the middle of conflict, in the middle of grief. The pause is waiting for you. The breath is waiting for you. The boat is at the shore, and the ferryman is you. We have spoken of the path. We have spoken of the boat and the river and the oars in your hands. But there is a question that arises naturally when we speak of practice, a question that every sincere traveler eventually asks: how will I know if I am making progress? This question reveals a deep and persistent misunderstanding. It assumes that the path is a trajectory from worse to better, from ignorant to enlightened, from suffering to liberation. It assumes that there is a self who is traveling and a destination that self will eventually reach. But these assumptions belong to the very disease we are attempting to cure. The path is not a line. It is a circle. You do not move from point A to point B. You move from forgetting to remembering, from distraction to presence, from the belief that you are separate to the recognition that you never were. And these are not accumulative achievements. They are not possessions you acquire and store in the warehouse of your identity. They are qualities of attention that must be renewed in every moment. You cannot become enlightened once and for all. You can only be awake now, and now, and now. And each now requires its own awakening. This is why the Buddha compared his teaching to a raft. You build the raft to cross the river. You labor over it, gathering materials, lashing logs together, constructing something sturdy enough to carry your weight. And then you launch it into the water and you cross. But what do you do when you reach the other shore? Do you hoist the raft onto your shoulders and carry it with you for the rest of your journey? Do you build a shrine to the raft and worship it? Do you sell tickets to other travelers who wish to admire your craftsmanship? No. You leave the raft at the water's edge. You walk on without looking back. The raft served its purpose. It carried you across. But it is not the destination, and clinging to it will only prevent you from going further. The path is a raft. The teachings are a raft. The techniques and practices and disciplines you have learned are a raft. They are invaluable tools for crossing the turbulent waters of craving and aversion. But they are not the shore. And the moment you mistake the raft for the shore, you have tied an anchor to your ankle and called it progress. A scholar spent 20 years studying the nature of water. He read every treatise. He memorized every formula. He could recite the chemical composition of every river, lake, and ocean on the continent. He lectured at universities and wrote books that were translated into a dozen languages. One day, a child approached him after a lecture. "Sir," the child said, "you know so much about water. Have you ever tasted it?" The scholar was offended. "Of course I have tasted water. I am not a fool." "But sir," the child said, "I do not mean water from a cup. I mean the water of the river behind my village. I go there every evening. I take off my shoes and I wade into the current. I feel it moving against my legs. I cup my hands and I drink. Is that the water you study?" The scholar opened his mouth to answer. Then he closed it. He had never waded into a river. He had never felt the current against his skin. He had studied water his entire life, but he had never let water study him. That evening, he walked to the river behind the child's village. He took off his shoes. He stepped into the current. It was colder than he expected. The stones beneath his feet were smooth and uneven. The water pushed against his shins, insisting on its own direction. He cupped his hands and drank. 20 years of study dissolved in that single mouthful. Not because his knowledge was false, but because his knowledge had become a barrier. He had mistaken the menu for the meal. He had collected pebbles from the shore and called it the ocean. The scholar returned to his university. He continued to teach. But now, when he spoke of water, he paused before he spoke. He remembered the current against his legs. He remembered the taste on his tongue. And his students, sensing that something had shifted in him, leaned forward in their seats and listened as if they were hearing about water for the very first time. This is the paradox of spiritual progress. The more you learn, the more you risk mistaking the learning for the living. The more you practice, the more you risk mistaking the raft for the shore. The more you accumulate insights and experiences and attainments, the more weight you carry into the next moment, where none of these things can help you. True progress is not accumulation. True progress is release. You do not become freer by acquiring more. You become freer by letting go. You release your attachment to outcomes. You release your identification with experiences. You release the belief that there is a self who is progressing towards some future state of perfection. And eventually, if you are diligent and patient and perhaps a little lucky, you release even the desire to be free. Because that desire, noble as it is still thirst. It is still the mind reaching toward a future moment that promises to be better than this one. What remains when even the desire for freedom is released? What remains is this: the breath entering, the breath leaving, the sound of rain on the roof, the warmth of your own skin, the presence of other beings, each one circling their own well, each one carrying their own raft, each one doing the best they can with the tools they have. What remains is not a state you can name or possess or compare to someone else's state. What remains is not an achievement you can list on your spiritual resume. What remains is simply life, living itself, without the constant interference of a self trying to manage it. You do not need to taste every river. You only need to taste the one that is flowing through this moment, over the stones of your own experience, cold and insistent and utterly indifferent to your theories about it. Take off your shoes. Step into the current. You have been standing on the shore long enough. We have spoken of release. We have spoken of letting go of the raft, releasing the desire for progress, surrendering even the longing for freedom. But there is a danger here, a subtle trap that catches many sincere practitioners at this stage. The danger is this: you may begin to believe that because the path is not about accumulation, it is therefore about nothing at all. You may mistake renunciation for indifference. You may confuse the release of attachment with the rejection of care. You may hear the word emptiness and conclude that nothing matters, that ethics are relative, that compassion is optional, that you are free to do whatever you want because ultimately all phenomena are illusory. This is not emptiness. This is nihilism dressed in borrowed robes. This is the ego's final, most sophisticated defense, pretending to be enlightened so it can continue its habits undisturbed. The Buddha anticipated this misunderstanding. He did not teach that nothing matters. He taught that everything matters, but not in the way you think. Actions still have consequences. Kindness still heals. Cruelty still wounds. The difference is that the awakened being does not act out of craving or aversion. They act out of clarity. They act because the situation calls for a response, not because they are trying to become someone who responds correctly. Imagine a mirror. The mirror does not choose what to reflect. It does not prefer beautiful faces over ugly ones, sunlight over shadow, joy over grief. It simply reflects whatever appears before it, clearly, completely, without distortion. The mirror does not accumulate the reflections. It does not cling to the beautiful face after it has turned away. It does not reject the shadow because it prefers the light. It just reflects, moment after moment, fresh and empty and utterly responsive. This is the model of awakened action. Not indifference. Not passivity. Not withdrawal from the world. It is the willingness to respond fully to each moment without carrying that response into the next moment. It is the willingness to love without possessing, to help without rescuing, to speak truth without demanding agreement, to act skillfully without requiring recognition. There was once a physician who lived in a city ravaged by plague. Every day, the sick came to her door. Every day, she examined their symptoms, prepared her medicines, and sat with them through the fever's peak. Some recovered. Some did not. She held the hands of the dying and helped the living return to their families. Years passed. The plague eventually subsided. The physician was old now, her hands steady but her back bent from decades of leaning over sickbeds. A young student came to study with her. "Teacher," the student said, "you have healed thousands of people. You must feel great satisfaction in your accomplishments." The physician was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I have never healed anyone." The student was confused. "But I have seen the records. I have spoken to the families of those you treated. Without you, they would have died. Without me, they would have found another physician, the physician said. Or they would have died. Either way, their illness was their own. Their healing was their own. I did not give them health. I simply arranged the conditions in which their bodies could do their own work. I provided medicine. I provided presence. I provided the steady hand and the listening ear. But the fever breaking, the wound closing, the breath deepening, that was never my doing. Then why did you do it? The student asked. If you take no credit for the healing, if you claim no satisfaction in the outcomes, why devote your entire life to this work? The physician looked at her hands. They were scarred from decades of handling sharp instruments. They were stained with medicines that could not be washed away. Because they were suffering, she said. And I knew how to help. That is the only reason that has ever mattered. This is the path of awakened action. Not acting to become good. Not acting to accumulate merit. Not acting to earn admiration or avoid guilt. Acting because suffering is present and you have the capacity to respond. Acting because this moment, exactly as it is, calls for your presence. Acting because the distinction between self and other, healer and healed, giver and receiver, was never as solid as you believed. When you see clearly, you recognize that the suffering of another is not separate from your own suffering. The boundary between your pain and their pain is a convention, a useful designation, but not an absolute reality. When you touch another's wound, you are touching your own wound. When you ease another's fever, you are cooling your own burning. This is not philosophy. This is direct perception. When the illusion of separation weakens, compassion is not a choice you make. It is the natural expression of a mind that no longer believes in the borders it once drew. You do not need to become compassionate. You only need to stop defending the fortress of self long enough to notice that the enemy outside the gates has the same face as the prisoner inside. The physician did not take a vow to heal the sick. She took a vow to remain present. The outcomes were never in her control. The fever would break or it would not. The wound would close or it would not. The patient would live or die. These were not her decisions. Her decision was simply to stay in the room, to keep her hands steady, to offer what she had learned without demanding gratitude or guarantees. This is the practice. Not the pursuit of perfect outcomes. Not the accumulation of healed patients and grateful families. It is the willingness to stay in the room. It is the willingness to touch suffering without recoiling. It is the willingness to act without requiring that your actions produce the results you prefer. You do not need to save the world. You only need to respond to the suffering that appears in your immediate vicinity, with the tools you have available, without demanding credit for the healing and without despairing at the deaths. This is enough. This has always been enough. We have traveled far together. We have sat beside the well and watched the thirsty draw water they could not keep. We have followed the cartographer's hand as he drew the circle of self and forgot he was the one holding the brush. We have watched the smoke clear from the room and recognized the walls had always been there. We have taken up the oars and crossed the river. We have left the raft upon the shore. And now we arrive at the final threshold. Not because the path ends here, but because the path has nowhere left to take you. You have been walking toward yourself, and you have finally arrived. What remains is not a teaching. It is not a technique. It is not a state to attain or a goal to achieve. What remains is the great unlearning. You have spent your entire life accumulating knowledge, possessions, relationships, identities, achievements, insights, spiritual experiences. You have built a magnificent collection. And now you must lay it all down. Not because these things are bad. Not because you were wrong to seek them. You lay them down because you no longer need to carry them. The weight has served its purpose. It taught you what you could not learn any other way. But the weight is still weight, and the shoulders grow tired. The Buddha compared his teaching to a raft. You build it to cross the river. You labor over it, gather the materials, lash the logs together. You launch it into the water and you cross. But when you reach the other shore, you do not hoist the raft onto your shoulders and carry it with you. You leave it at the water's edge. It served its purpose. It carried you across. But it is not the destination, and clinging to it will only prevent you from walking further. This includes every teaching you have received in this long contemplation. It includes the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the metaphors of thirst and separation and awakening. These are rafts. They are fingers pointing at the moon. But you have been staring at the finger for so long you have forgotten to look at what it is pointing toward. The moon does not need your belief. It does not require your study. It does not demand your devotion. It simply hangs in the sky, radiating borrowed light, completing its eternal orbit whether you notice it or not. You cannot earn the moon. You cannot achieve it. You cannot possess it. You can only look up and see that it was always there, waiting for your gaze to rise above your own hands. There was once a scribe who spent his entire life copying sacred texts. He worked in a monastery scriptorium, his desk positioned beneath a tall window that filled his pages with golden light. He copied the sutras of the Buddha, the teachings of the patriarchs, the commentaries of the great scholars. His handwriting was flawless. His manuscripts were sought after by monasteries throughout the land. 50 years passed. His hair whitened. His eyes dimmed. His hands, once so steady, began to tremble over the parchment. One morning, the abbot came to his desk. "Master Scribe," he said, "you have served this monastery faithfully for half a century. Your work has preserved the Dharma for generations yet unborn. Is there anything more you wish to accomplish before you rest?" The scribe looked at his hands. He looked at the half-finished page before him. He looked at the golden light streaming through the tall window. "Yes," he said. "There is one thing." He took his brush. He dipped it in ink. And on a fresh sheet of parchment, in letters as perfect as any he had ever made, he wrote a single word. He set down the brush. He pushed back his chair. He walked to the window and stood in the light. The abbot approached the desk and looked at the parchment. The scribe had written his own name. For 50 years, he had copied the words of others. He had preserved the insights of every awakened being who had come before him. He had never once written his own word, offered his own teaching, trusted his own awakening. The abbot smiled. He took the parchment and carried it to the monastery archive. He placed it in the center of the great library, surrounded by the thousands of pages the scribe had copied over his long life. "The library is complete," the abbot said. "This is the final teaching. Not the accumulation of others' wisdom, but the courage to trust your own. Not the endless copying of ancient truths, but the recognition that truth is not ancient. It is not modern. It is not anywhere other than here, now, in this breath, in this body, in this awareness that has been reading these words and slowly, imperceptibly, waking up. You have been copying the words of others your entire life. You have been trying to become someone else's idea of enlightenment, someone else's idea of peace, someone else's idea of freedom. But the only freedom that can be authentically yours is the freedom you discover in your own heart, at your own pace, through your own direct investigation. The Buddha cannot save you. The Dharma cannot carry you. The Sangha cannot walk the path for you. These are rafts, and you have reached the shore. It is time to leave the raft behind. It is time to write your own name. It is time to become the ancestor rather than the descendant, the teacher rather than the student, the awakened one rather than the seeker. What you have been seeking has been seeking you. And now, after all this time, after all these words, after all these breaths, you have finally arrived at the place where seeking and finding are the same gesture. Welcome home.